Hello everyone and welcome to the overview video of Tempest Combat Framework. In this video it's just gonna be an overall look at how TCF will behave and function together with its systems. It's not gonna be something big, it's not gonna be something deep, it's just gonna be just a scratch on the surface on how the systems work together. So it's not gonna focus on one part of it, it's just gonna focus in the whole thing. If you don't understand a few things, that's okay, because I'm gonna do a deep down videos later on down the road. But for now, this is just an overview. Before we continue, I would like to remind you that before you continue with this video or any other video, you'll need to read the entire documentation. It's not gonna be long, it's not gonna be something big to take in, it's just a theoretical way of explaining how the system works. So make sure you read all of that before you continue and then come back to this video. Also, some things I mentioned in the documentation, I'm gonna confirm them again. You will need to know enhanced inputs, blueprint communication, gameplay tags, as well as inheritance. Once you know all four, then you'll not have any difficulties working with the system. Understanding these 4 points is extremely important. You're gonna have to know them before you continue with TCF. So without further ado, let's dive into how this TCF works. If you look on the screen, you'll see that this is exactly the same window you used to get in the playable demo. If you have played it, you start with this level. So if we play, you're gonna see the exact same thing. So we're gonna dive into the map that I used for development. We're gonna use the gray box boss room. If you give that a little, you're not gonna have this in your position, but I'm gonna explain how you're gonna get it later on down the road. But for now, I just want to explain to you how this TCF work in itself. So on the start, actually let me change this character because I didn't even update it. Let me take the twin blade character and I'm gonna assign it the player one. So right here you'll see I spawned with a twin blade on my back. Let me start with explaining the weapons. This weapon is the same weapon I'll see here. If you can take it or you spawn with it, whatever, up to you. For now, if you take another weapon too, it will change. So for the time being, I'm just gonna explain on Twin Blade. So Twin Blade, which is an actor I'll give you later down the road. For now, just bear with me as I explain how this whole system works together. So for Twin Blade, it's a child of base player weapon. You will have the same exact blueprint later, I'll give it to you. But for now, let's just bear with me how this thing works. So on overlap, what I'm doing is basically equipping the weapon. What happens when I equip the weapon, I'm changing the mesh location, as well as I'm updating the animation blueprint. And I'm changing the moveset for the animation blueprint so it updates the blended spaces in the animation blueprint. I expect you all to know what I just said entirely. Animation blueprint, how does the mesh work with animation blueprint, and so on. After that, I'm creating a trace for every part of the weapon. I'm creating a new static mesh component that is being added to the character, which is the owner of this weapon. Then I'm constructing the trace class for it, as well as setting which socket it will use on that mesh component, and registering the mesh with the what do you call it? The weapon itself. So the weapon itself knows how many weapons it has in hand. It could have one weapon, 2 weapons, or whatever you want, and it will perform few things based on what registers into it. So for now, when registering a weapon, I only have a equipping socket and unequipping socket. So you could have an animation that equips one weapon, another animation that equips another weapon, or one animation that equips and unequips at the same time. So for that, each weapon has to have its own properties or criteria. So once you create a mesh, we register the weapon and what socket it will be registered on and what socket it won't be. By the way, the equipping of the socket itself that you will have must be present on the skeletal mesh that you'll be using with your game or with your demo or whatever. So aside from attaching it, registering it, setting the static mesh, registering the sockets on the weapon for the trace to be used later on. So once you create a trace, you are gonna have to set it with a trace gameplay tag, as well as assign the mesh that will be registered uh, with its sockets to be used later on for the trace. So the three things: constructing, gameplay tag, and setting mesh info. The mesh info, of course, will take a primitive component. It could be a skeletal mesh, it could be a static mesh, whatever you like. And the sockets registered with that skeletal mesh. For example, I'm using static mesh here for weapon twin blade, and I have all the sockets I needed. You can see the sockets right here. This is where you add them, where you view them. And I took all of them and put them in. I took half of them and put them here because I'm creating two static meshes. Each will be using its own array of sockets. So after that, same thing here, no change. I'm setting attributes and states that are taken from the data asset. So every player weapon will have an associated data asset with it. And if you open that up, it will, on the very bottom, you'll see something called attributes to create, as well as states to create, abilities, and player inputs. If we start from the bottom, I'm setting attributes to create, which are values you're gonna set based on the health attributes. I don't have to explain all this to you. I'm probably assuming you already know. This is where you set the values. And from that, I'm updating the states every time you equip a weapon. You could actually not use this if you don't want to. It's entirely up to you. Every weapon will have a different behavior, I understand. So for the time being, I'm setting that on the twin blade, not on the place player weapon, so you won't see it here. So after setting the attributes and states, which is gonna take the states from here as well, I forgot to mention this. States will be taken from the data asset as well as the attributes. We will come down to abilities and inputs in a bit. So after setting that, I'm setting the equipped weapon for the player, just setting a value, destroying the sphere that I overlapped with. You can remove this if you don't want to, no problem. And I'm adding a trace to be, you have seen in the video where the great sword guy stabs me and throws me on a pillar that breaks on top of me. This is where it's done. I'm setting a new trace class that builds on the character mesh itself, with the socket being the pelvis. I'll explain the the traces and how it works in a bit. So after that, you will see the weapon in my hand. In the data asset, I have something called equip weapon state. So if you click left click or R key, you will equip the weapon. Let's start with equipping, and later on we'll go into attacking and what happens when you attack and receive damage. For equipping the weapon, we're gonna go to the controller where I'm holding all the information I'm using for the called TCF something. You will have a controller on your own. It's gonna look identical to what I have, except that has little few things I removed for debugging. So on equip, on attack, I have this. This is from enhanced input. All the enhanced input things I'm using here do use the same structure I'm using here. Can fire input, does the state allow, and registering the last input before firing anything. So keep that consistent across the whole project, because the power of TCF shows actually here. So on attack, if it starts means I clicked it. It will check if I can fire input. Now how does can fire input? If you open this up, it will check does input exist in mapping. Where does this go is it will go to the data asset equipped with the weapon, and it's gonna check does that input exist over here. So for example, we were looking for attacks. Attack is the first one registered here. So if let's just say you're gonna equip a weapon and you don't wanna attack with that weapon at all, so you can just remove attack input and that input will never fire as long as it's not in the data asset. So this is one of the things I'm using in the it's one of the macros I'm using here. So campfire input will not fire if it's not registered within the data asset. The one next comes to it is does state allow input. Now if you open this up, this will check the active state at any given time, and it's gonna check if that state allows it to run. This is connected to the what do you call it? The input buffer system, where if you want some inputs to be buffered at a specific time and some inputs won't be. So this is directly connected to it. And if this passes, it will register it, uh, setting the value, and then tries to perform the equip state that you see right here. This function is used everywhere across the project. The only thing you need to worry about is the state gameplay tag. And I'm going to explain the states and how they work together in a bit. So state gameplay tag, and this is where it tries to run. This could potentially fail, that's why I have a return value. So first it will try to equip if a weapon is not equipped. If it succeeds, it will run, and this won't fire anymore. If it doesn't succeed, means you already have something equipped in your hand, then it will try to attack, and so on. So for example, if I go play, left click once, I equipped, because I don't have anything equipped. If you left click one more time, it will attack. So equip will fail, and attack will proceed. Now, if we go back here, I'm gonna start explaining how states work together and how does a state work with does state allow input.